if a president and an administration would come in and get really serious about reducing government size and expense, that layoffs are a big part of that.
The thing that really stood out to me is they were suggesting, what if we give back 20% to the taxpayer, use 20% of the savings to pay down debt specifically, and then the balance to kind of work towards narrowing the gap between the spend and the intake.
They could spend $16,000 or $17,000 in rate buy downs to get to that monthly cost. To get to the monthly mortgage amount with a price reduction, it was $60,000 or $70,000. And so, they are really hitting a home run with these rate buy downs and not having to reduce the price.
Accusing the appraiser of, controlling the market is a little bit like accusing the weatherman of controlling the weather. When you're reporting what's happening in an area, it doesn't mean that you're causing it or directing it to happen. You're simply trying to reflect what's going on there. And
Episode 32 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Jeff, it is good to be with you again today. We have continued sort of utter chaos in the real estate news landscape. Hot off the press as you and I are pushing record on this episode, we have Ginnie Mae announcing major layoffs, 50%. That may be already part of the announced HUD 50% layoffs. We have significant layoffs reported coming for the Federal Housing Administration. We have the CFPB heading to irrelevance, it seems, as it sits now. And in the National Fair Housing Alliance, with every appraiser's favorite billboard, at least having grant funding paused in sort of in flux now. What a world we're living in.
Yeah, only a few things to talk about there, Mark, and that's just one small segment of things that we've talked about. It's been interesting to see this evolution where we've kind of gone from what are we going to talk about to holy crap, there's so much to talk about. How are we going to get to all of it? But fascinating to see just the 180-degree turn that this administration, kind of the impact it's having throughout the markets, the government, perspectives. I'm excited to dive into some of these things with you, but boy, there's sure a lot of change in a short period of time.
Yeah, I was talking to a colleague that sits on a affordable housing board here in the city of Houston, actually, and they were a little concerned because these cuts and all the flux is creating some uncertainty around their ability to assist in the way that they have been, and an understandable concern for someone that's trying to do a real good in a major city. And my immediate response, coming from the very biased view that I am, which is trying to operate a real estate appraisal business at scale here, is I don't remember the last thing that any of these groups did that was helpful to me in the last 2 years. So if they are impacted at least for a little bit, maybe I'll have less billboards attacking me and the work that we do. So I don't know. I really don't know how to feel about it all. Consumer financial protection seems like something that should be there. So on some level, but to what extent?
There's just so much happening right now on all of those fronts. It really is hard to keep track of. I commented recently on a Facebook group, probably I think an appraiser one, where they were observing this pause in funding for the Fair Housing Alliance as well, and the frustration is that the billboards out there saying, "Hey, you've probably been the victim of some biased appraiser that's messed up your value. Here's how to reach out and do something about it." I mean, it's really, to me, kind of come across as more of a solicitation for business for them than it is like a well-intentioned, public information campaign or something. But you make an interesting point, though, Mark. I saw, in fact, my wife called me earlier this week. I can't even keep it all straight, saying, "Hey, there's a protest downtown," and I'm in St. George, Utah. It's like smaller town or community, but there were protests against the DOGE effort, the cutting of some of these federal funds and government policies and institutions, and we've got national parks and we've got things that are funded through federally,
Hmm.
And people that are impacted directly by that, I certainly understand and can sympathize with. You got to have an appropriate level of funding and support to operate certain things, and seeing some pushback on some of these. It was interesting. It was impactful, I think, for me to just consider that, hey, this is impacting people on both sides of the fence or the aisle as far as it goes.
Jeff, it's something we've talked about quite a bit. Maybe starting or before we had the interview with Scott DiBiasio talking about whether or not Harris or Trump might win, the different policies that are out there. But if a president and an administration would come in and get really serious about reducing government size and expense, that layoffs are a big part of that. I think I'm sure it's more now, but the last number I had seen is something like 75,000 folks that had chosen to leave. You've got a lot more layoffs in addition to that, and this disrupts wherever government is. Certainly Washington D.C. I'm watching with an aware eye on kind of the anecdotes coming out so far. The loan officers and appraisers and whatnot that I keep track of over there saying, I'm not sure you'll see anything in the data yet, but there certainly is. What was it? I don't remember the exact terms, but the Google searches coming out of DC were pretty comical. It's like I need a lawyer, or how to scrub data, or something like that. I don't know what it was, but there's clearly a shakeup coming.
I don't doubt that at all. It's interesting to see what the impacts are, and one interesting angle, at least interesting to me, is you've got at least some pushback on these cutting policies that aren't popular with those that are getting cut. Whether direct employees or constituents. Where a senator or representative member has gotten stuff for their local district or whatnot. A counterbalance to that was that really stood out to me, Mark, that I saw recently, was at least an idea floated, by I think President Trump and Elon, was that of what if we took some of the percentage of this DOGE savings and specifically return that back to the taxpayer. I think, if I remember right, I think it was 20% they were suggesting, and I don't know how this would work. It's far from formalized and actually what's happening, but the thing that really stood out to me is they were suggesting, what if we give back 20% to the taxpayer, use 20% of the savings to pay down debt specifically, and then the balance to kind of work towards narrowing the gap between the spend and the intake. And the thing that really stood out is, if they did something like that, where a majority of people saw some sort of direct impact to them personally, especially at tax time, I think it could be the means of getting a lot of real popular support for the cutting that's taking place that otherwise, may go a little bit unnoticed, or, you have a lot of those that are impacted, screaming and opposing it, but without, the benefit that others could receive. It was a fascinating idea that I saw.
Yeah, that it is. It's interesting to me, and I think again we've been talking about on these weekly episodes here about the unlikelihood that an initiative like this would ever make it into a republic in the way that we elect leaders now. I mean, you kind of vote your pocketbook. The candidate sells more things to the voters, and it just sort of never stops. And it seems to me the only way there was obviously going to be a very short honeymoon, and then there was going to be a reality setting in that this is nasty business. Reductions and staff layoffs, those in private business, may have the unlucky familiarity with these things. They're awful. There is nothing worse, and to go through it in the government's no different. It's really painful, and just has a period of great difficulty. And so I think connecting the taxpayer to what's happening, and really bringing home the fact that these are tax dollars that are likely being wasted, and that it really brings home, I guess, that this is money out of your pocket to go to something that maybe we wouldn't be wanting to do.
I think that's right, and to the extent that you can connect the dollars coming into your pocket or going out to actions that are being taken, I think make it seem a little bit more real than just a headline or a commentary, where whatever side of the aisle you fall on, following stuff on X or anywhere else. But It's not the only topic I think that you and I had hit on that could impact or does impact affordability and just people's financial well-being and thereby the real estate market. There are a number of things that have been out there in the news and that potentially are impacting people. One headline that I saw that was interesting, and again, these are ideas being floated. They're certainly not in place, but President Trump and Florida Governor DeSantis were suggesting a pullback, or what if we didn't have any property taxes, as a way to impact people's, pocketbooks directly. What do you think about that?
Boy, interesting. Yeah. When you're paying property taxes, do you ever really own the property? So long as you're paying those taxes, I think you do. But the second you stop, and it's notable to me in the states that have very little property tax, coming from a place like Texas, where I've lived my whole life, and property taxes are the way that we get tax revenue in, and they're huge. They're absolutely huge. And so my understanding is the state of Florida gets something like 30 to 35 billion a year in property taxes. I think it's an interesting concept to remove them. A lot of bold ideas like eliminating the IRS and income tax entirely, I think. But it did seem like it would only take, I think the sales tax in Florida is something like 6% and would only take a 2 or 3%, maybe even less, increase in sales tax, more of a consumption-based tax to make up for the lost revenue there. And it's interesting to me that could be possible from a dollars and cents perspective. And it really brings how would we rather pay our taxes? I think is a really valid question. I don't know if I have a huge perspective on it, but kind of a punishment on owning real estate isn't maybe the best, and I think could encourage more establishing that home base and living that American dream of kind of knowing where home is.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Mark. And the reason that I'm interested in the conversation is, as it relates to real estate and residential real estate specifically, is affordability is a challenge. You and I talked last time about the inventory levels of homes that are available on the market starting to increase. Maybe that results in some price reductions to help affordability for those that are trying to buy or would like to. The way that people typically buy a house isn't as much on the overall sales price as it is what can I afford on a monthly basis. Of course, your mortgage payment, your principal and interest is the biggest component of that, but you have property tax. If you're getting a mortgage, it's usually worked into an escrow account. You've got homeowners insurance, which is another topic where we're seeing some increases that are a factor in that as well. We're not seeing interest rates drop. There's mixed forecasts and projections as to whether they will, if so, when, and how much. But the combination of interest rates and what they do, property taxes and what they do, homeowners insurance and what that does, really impact whether somebody can afford to buy a home or not. And so each of those in and of themselves is an interesting topic of conversation. But if you diverted the tax revenue for states and local governments from property-based to a consumption-based or an income tax base, I'll hear some states talk about not having an income tax, but they've got really heavy property tax, or vice versa, or sales rate tax. You usually end up paying it one way or the other. But if you're worried about housing affordability, reducing or eliminating the property tax makes a real difference for those looking to buy in the market. You're going to end up paying it one way or the other at some level, but it does impact real estate, pricing, and I think affordability for those that want to be in the market.
Jeff, this may speak more to my personal finance mismanagement than it does my than the market as a whole, but I think it's probably a microcosm. I have an insurance broker for my home that will just price out, and they've kind of been on autopilot for years, damn near a decade. And I started getting notes from the mortgage company saying, "Hey, you got an escrow shortage, and you're going to nearly have to double your mortgage payment each month to kind of catch up or get wherever you got to go." And that started catching my attention. Come to find out that there was a 100% increase from last year's premium to this in my home insurance. And I went to the broker and said, "Yeah, this is the best," and gave me it was like, yeah, there was no other option, and here's like 12 reasons why you should be okay paying double. And not finding that acceptable, surprisingly. Went to some kind of more modern. Lemonade actually is where I ended up, kind of a modern insurance solution. Got a 20% increase, which was very modest in perspective, or in correlation to the what I had had previously. And it makes an enormous difference. And when you're getting hit with, my family got hit with almost double-digit tuition increases, and somebody in Chicago was sharing with me this week that they had an 18% increase in their tuition from last year to this coming. It's just, there is a lot of increase coming everywhere, and it's not just home price times mortgage rate.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And such an interesting, anecdote, that you're highlighting there. And I was just listening to an article talking about State Farm and insurance policies in California having pulled out, or stopping the coverage there because the state did not allow them to increase premiums enough to keep up with the actual cost of insurance. But whether it's fires and flooding in California, flooding and hurricanes, through your neck of the woods and throughout the Southeast, really, there's just a lot of expense that has to be borne, through risk mitigation in one form or another. And the frequency of natural events, it seems to be increasing. That's a risk factor. But two, when house pricing is double what it was, just the cost to insure the asset at twice the value of what it might have been, 5 or 10 years ago, is also a factor. And all of these things speak to affordability, like you're saying. It's not just the interest rate, which has not been a friend to anybody looking to buy, but it's also property tax and these insurance rates. So I don't think I see a reason to expect insurance to come down. Hard to know, but our projections on interest rates are, if they come down, it's not going to be a lot, and it's not going to be anytime soon. It all seems to be a recipe for, maybe there will have to be some softening in home pricing. If the inventories continue to build as we highlighted last week that they are, it's going to take time. Something's going to turn from week to week or even from month to month, but it could be setting up, the stage for some sort of a price reduction in home pricing at some point. I'm not good enough to call that's around the corner or happening, but it seems to be one of the levers that, or the things that could give.
Well, Jeff, kind of on that note, I've got a few different data points to run through, and would love to get your kind of totality opinion on it all. But you mentioned interest rates. As we are sitting here today, they are the lowest they've been in more than 8 weeks, 6.89%. So good on us. We can all celebrate a non-7 handle. That's generally a step forward. Hopefully they stay there. You've been hearing the administration and the Treasury Department talking a lot about, look, our goal is to attack the 10-year interest rate, and that is directly tied to mortgage. So hopefully all of these things we've been talking about can make an impact there. We have the DOGE clock. We won't show it, but it is at 121 billion as we're sitting here. Notable that DOGE themselves took credit for about 55 billion in cuts just over the last 5 or 6 days. And NPR has said, no, it's only 9 billion. So take your pick of the numbers. I don't know, somewhere ballpark between 9 and 121 billion, give or take a few billion, but a few hundred billion, I guess. But yeah, so we've got it's just a lot going on as it relates to the savings, as it relates to this, and then we have Toll Brothers, who had an earnings release this week. They are down 18% this month. I think almost 19%. They're a top 30 builder, certainly not one of the top 5, but there have been days this week where every home builder publicly traded was down 3% or so. Really rough week for home builders. You mentioned increasing inventory. It's just the fire hose of data and analysis, requiring analysis is there for us. What do you make of all of this?
Boy, such a good question. I have to comment about the DOGE savings though before I get into that. Can you imagine your real estate agent coming to you and saying, well, your house is either worth $90,000 or maybe it's worth $550,000 or maybe it's worth $1.2 million. It's somewhere in there. We'll figure it out, down the road, or the appraiser, telling you the same thing. That's a a wild spread on what the actual impact of DOGE savings has been.
Jeff,
It was just funny to see that.
Let's not get into why you might have come to that difference. That is a real slippery slope.
Yeah, yeah, boy, no doubt. One I could get myself in trouble on commenting on, but so it was just notable how difficult it is to really keep track of these things, and then the impact. Potentially, is it really having a huge impact, or negligible, or somewhere in between in terms of the savings? But regarding the builders and what they're seeing, one of the things I think that's been an impact. I saw some analysis specifically correlating the drop in some of the top builders' stock prices to proposed and discussed tariffs and increase of cost of labor, or not labor, of materials costs. And I think the problem is they're already pushing up against buyer resistance at the price levels that they're at. If their input costs go up further, they're not going to be able to keep selling at their levels. And in fact, we're seeing them try to retain the the prices where they're at, and then just offering buy downs in interest rates as a way to help bridge the gap between what the buyer can afford and what they're trying to make on these things. And so I think anything that puts additional upward pressure on their costs is going to have a very adverse and direct impact on their stock price in the short term.
Yeah, Jeff. So, I don't remember the builder now. Someone was describing it. They may not have mentioned the builder, but we're just walking through the math on these rate buy downs for builders, and to achieve the whatever the monthly payment that a new borrower would have to pay to acquire this $400,000 house or $500,000 house, whatever it was out there. They could spend $16,000 or $17,000 in rate buy downs to get to that monthly cost. To get to the monthly mortgage amount with a price reduction, it was $60,000 or $70,000, and so they are really hitting a home run with these rate buy downs and not having to reduce the price. It's no wonder this is working. It has the same effect. What does the buyer care, I guess, if the analysis is only what the mortgage payment is? How can I get into this property? But does that have ramifications for sale price down the road? I don't know, or value.
Yeah, it's such a good question, and the kind of thing that appraisers could nerd out on, I think, for a long time. I think the high level analysis, or at least summary in my mind, is at some point the market has a way of self-correcting. It's way more cost effective, like you said, for the builder to just buy down the rate than it is to make the corresponding reduction in price to have the same net impact on the buyer's monthly mortgage payment, whether they can afford to make the purchase or not. When you don't have those buy downs in the resale market, I think that's where the price tends to correct. And at some point, if there's a big enough spread between the 3 or 5 year old home that's about the same thing as the new one, but you can buy it for enough less, then the buyers go away from buying directly from the builders and into the existing inventory. That hasn't happened to this point because a lot of the people in the 3 to 5 year old homes have a 2 or 3 or 4% interest rate and aren't selling and moving on unless they have to. So it's a combination of factors here, but it has a compounding and an interesting effect on what we see in terms of sales and the impact that it has on the builders, on the buyers, and kind of the lack of existing home sellers in the moment.
Yeah, great, Jeff. Well, I wanted to our appraiser listeners, especially those that are experienced on the internet, will be very familiar with these billboards from the National Fair Housing Alliance. This was one of the entities that you and I talked about that were at least have grant funding from the government, our taxpayer dollars going to the National Fair Housing Alliance, and this was one of the uses of them. And this rubbed a lot of appraisers the wrong way, feeling sort of defenseless against these suggestions. And I was on a call last week, I think, where some folks representing appraisers had met. I think it was Appraisal Institute that had met with this group and trying to get meetings for a while, and specifically talking about these billboards and what they're implying. And the implication, interestingly, was not that appraisers are biased, but appraisals are biased one way or another, and kind of leading into the sales comparison approach and a lot of these arguments that we've heard. And I thought it was wanted to tie directly the grant pausing. So something like February, well, around January 20th or whenever the new administration took office, there was a pausing in grant funding, like nationwide, sort of whole hog. This group was included in that. On February 3rd, there was a judge that stayed that halt. And so I think the White House, I think, is still referencing pauses one way or another. So I got no idea where this stuff is at, but I did want to connect some of that halting to something that appraisers likely are very familiar with. Those that are watching this podcast that aren't appraisers may be far less aware of these type of billboards that were out. Appraisers felt attacked for sure, but this was in Men's Health and GQ, and this photo I think is one in the Denver airport. So these were in airports all over the country. Yeah, I think my read on the closed door conversation with NFHA was I'm not really a back down from these sorts of things, for better or worse. But the grant funding, and all of the reductions in programs and staff and programs that we talked about at the beginning of the show, this is an example of something that it could be tied to, along with many other things.
Yeah, for sure. I've been in the Denver airport and seen that, live and firsthand. I didn't have anybody with me. I resisted the temptation to stand underneath it and like take a selfie or something. I didn't want to, indict myself as one of those appraisers that they're implicitly, attacking or whatever. But, the only other comment I've got on that, Mark, is that, HUD has opened investigations specifically in bias allegations against appraisers. And I think maybe with one possible exception, there's been no finding of any, overt or direct bias or prejudice or whatever from an appraiser on the property and in doing the analysis. And the problem is, I think they just don't understand the process well enough to really comprehend. Many times, the appraiser doesn't even know who owns or is purchasing the property. Certainly in a purchase transaction, it's the seller isn't the buyer, necessarily that you meet there. Many times it's vacant, but I've long felt like, accusing the appraiser of, controlling the market is a little bit like accusing the weatherman of controlling the weather. When you're reporting what's happening in an area, it doesn't mean that you're causing it or directing it to happen. You're simply trying to reflect what's going on there. And it's a long kind of history and complicated, reason as to why things have evolved the way that they are today. The appraiser's job is to reflect things the way that they are today without, injecting their own, preferences. And I think by and large, appraisers, do a good job of that. But it's just, I think that's rubbed a lot of appraisers the wrong way, because it speaks to a lack of understanding as to how an appraiser goes about valuing a property in the first place. And it of course, it shouldn't have anything to do with the owner or the people or the owner of the property. And it doesn't, but I think they're looking for problems where they don't exist.
Yeah, Jeff, I think the numbers I saw over the last week were 300 HUD cases of investigation of bias. 5 have moved beyond the investigation to maybe some sort of litigation or something, and only one of them has moved towards what the one in Colorado has. So I think that is the lone one that has moved, and that sounds like a pretty awful case of a lot of different things where the appraiser has given up license and did some things that weren't great with signature stealing and all that sort of stuff. So, but over the last 30 days, for those that may be one of the 300 under these very scary allegations and then process that you go through with HUD, dismissals are starting to come by mail, maybe with a retainer of the possibility to seek civil suit. But that is starting to happen over the last 30 days. And I'm sure to many appraisers, happiness.
Yeah, you bet. Well, and I think it's a good point that you make, Mark, where there are egregious, things being done or, bad actors, action should be taken. I mean, we're in no way defending those that are doing, bad and inappropriate and unprofessional things. It's just that I think it's easy to get a little bit jaded when you see people go through the process and kind of some of the first communication, in addition to, hey, we're opening an investigation of a bias complaint against you. How about we just agree to settle this now? And it feels like they're just shaking you down for some money. Pay us something, and then we can say that we've resolved this, and we go on our way, when there's nothing to to it in the first place. It's just unfortunate the way I think that it's played out over time. But to see the pullback on those that really aren't founded in anything, where there is nefarious action that's taken place, I think everybody's happy to see that.
Amen. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So wanted to reference, just I think a general thesis of this podcast is keeping the listener informed along real estate news generally around the country and world. This was a really good CNBC summation of how Fannie and Freddie got into conservatorship, maybe a little bit of a touch on what they do, what the likelihood or challenges are of them exiting conservatorship. Friend of the pod, Mark Calabria, was interviewed and did a great job presenting his perspectives, including the possibility that rates decline upon exiting conservatorship, while another economist was there suggesting that they maybe go higher. So we'll have this link in the show notes. Just wanted to reference this for the audience. It's about 10 minutes. And I thought it was a pretty good, CNBC does well at these sorts of kind of quick looks. And this was no exception.
They do almost as good as Market Moves. We had Mark first.
Yeah.
And a very intelligent guy. I mean, it was I really enjoyed that conversation and a lot of fun. But it just speaks to how hard it is to really project what the future is going to hold based on certain actions. Mark, I think, makes a compelling case as to why interest rates may go down upon privatization of Fannie and Freddie. Now, that's a question mark as to whether it happens. The other economist was arguing the exact opposite. So either rates will go up or they'll go down, or it's reasonable, I guess, to assume that they'll stay, kind of somewhere in between as a result of a privatization. But it's just hard to realistically know. But worth noting here, Mark, maybe just kind of tangentially, that right now, or just recently come out, that Mark Calabria is, I think, in a temporary role as the head of the CFPB, and looking at, or going to be in a role of the OMB within the federal government. So it was a lot of fun to be able to have him maybe condescend to come and talk with us a bit. But I think somebody I would have confidence in, driving some national policy in either of those organizations.
You bet. Yeah. The Office of Management and Budget, I think, is what the acronym stands for. And, I think he is, in his own words, detailed to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau while it is on its way to being sidelined or whatever's happening. I think they have a director coming in, but the confirmation process is not slow, or it's not fast. And so he's there to sort of help for a little bit, and then we'll assume some other roles in the OMB or whatever it is. But congratulations to Mark. He wouldn't tell us, probably didn't know what role he was gonna be filling, but here it is. So he does have a role in the space. Pretty cool to see.
Well, kudos to you, Mark. I thought that I had the OMB acronym right, but I wasn't brave enough to take a shot at it. But yeah, that's exactly right. I think you've described perfectly what his current role is within the administration. But fun to see where it goes.
Beautiful. Well, Jeff, I wanted to take us just a quick sidestep here to commercial real estate. It kind of noteworthy over the last week or two that our everyone's favorite investor, Warren Buffett, is continuing to sell his bank stocks, of which he owns a considerable amount. And it's just interesting to see. And up on the screen here, we've got this is from 2023, and real estate values have gone down. But I think that this would probably be one of the issues that Buffett might have concern with if he is selling the stock based on concern in that overall health of banks in the US. But is the value and exposure of commercial real estate, all this work from home stuff. You now got what seems like a lot of federal buildings, office buildings being thrown back onto the market because they're sitting idle within a lease. And this is one of the ways to reduce expense. But, JP Morgan's CEO, Jamie Dimon, was just secretly recorded. I'm sure he loved that, or maybe he did it on purpose. I don't know. But lambasting the work from home generation and all that this has left. Jeff, you and I run a company that is intentionally work from home and kind of was work from home before it was cool, for better or worse. And there are elements of our business that help make that a good thing to do. But we don't have any intention of going back. And I saw some that were maybe accusing Jamie Dimon's secret recorded lambasting of work from home as a biased rant because they have a whole bunch of commercial real estate in their portfolio, and he needs to get the whole country back to work to fill up to fill up the occupancy in these buildings. But Buffett's selling a lot of Bank of America stock. I think Citi is the other one. I'll look in a second here, but part of the major concern would be that these are not being, the values of the commercial real estate are not being updated with obviously materially defining or declining commercial rates around the country, with office buildings specifically going, having vacancies double or triple. And this was an interesting chart showing that, you've got JP Morgan at 13% of their loan holdings in commercial real estate, Bank of America at 7%, Wells Fargo 21%, Citigroup, who I think I had heard someone expressing concern, maybe we had on the pod or in researching it, it's only at 4%, but these are concerning numbers, and concerning that if you watch for indicators, and Buffett being a pretty wise character and showing an ability to reasonably predict what's coming down the pipe, there may be concern.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Mark. He's got I know Bank of America stock that was part of what's been unloaded, and they were relatively low on that percentage holding at just under 7%. So I would think that his exposure maybe wasn't as bad as others. I sometimes wonder if Wells Fargo can do anything right. I mean, it just seems like they're constantly being beat up for some sort of fines and lawsuits and punishments and stuff. They're sitting on over 20% of commercial real estate holdings. And it also strikes me the timing is a little bit interesting with Warren's decision to sell, if this is the main reason, because I think that the push to return to office, and we looked at this was part of what we thought last week might be driving some of the housing inventories, where Northeast, where there had been an exodus, they're starting to, or they're seeing low housing inventory, suggesting people are coming back, and potentially back to work there. I will be watching this, with some curiosity, because it sure seems like now you might be seeing a trend towards, better occupancy in office space than there had been the last several years. But it's interesting to watch. I know that, this extend and pretend concept of, we don't want to take the property back, so we're just going to renew the loan and hope that it gets better down the road. Well, it would seem that, maybe there's hope that it would get better down the road. And yet I think Warren's actions would suggest that he's at least concerned that there's more pain before there's resolution here.
Yeah, that's right, Jeff. So it's like 15% of Bank of America stock, 117 million shares worth $5 billion. He now owns less than 9%. Capital One position trimmed by 1.6 million shares. Citigroup, he's let go of about 74% of his holdings one way or another. So, I think one thing I know for sure, Jeff, is he is brighter than I am, and so I'm at least going to watch with what he's doing and take into account. And I'm not so sure we're out of the woods yet in terms of difficulty in commercial real estate. There is certainly a momentum, a cultural shift to return to office. We've seen that in a lot of cases, but you've got all sorts of I want to call them deflationary currents, but AI needing less people out there. You've got the government making sizable reductions in staff, and just a changing way of life one way or another. And I don't know how it's going to shake out. I think we certainly went to the extreme, but I do think we're it's going to be worse tomorrow than it was in, say, 2018 or 2017.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the unfortunate thing personally in this whole scenario is that by the time I have any money to manage, Warren won't be around to do it. And so I'll have to find somebody who's an adequate replacement for him. But moment I wish I could just give him money to manage, and that's not a luxury I have.
On that, Jeff, and this is just a personal hobby observation between you and I, but I think it was Bill Ackman, one of our other favorite investors, was just explaining his plan to build the next Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett by an acquisition of something like 49% of the Howard Hughes company, which Howard Hughes is mostly a real estate developer. I think they're only a real estate developer, and they've got a lot of developments here in and around Houston. I know they have one in Vegas, not far from you. But using that as the basis to build out of. So maybe you don't need Warren Buffett. Maybe Bill Ackman can be your manager.
I'm going to hope that Bill doesn't let me down, because I'm afraid that Warren won't be able to be investing far into the future. Incredible to see just the longevity that he's had there, Mark. I mean, still doing this into his 90s and sharp and effective. And it is unfortunate to lose Charlie Munger, his partner, not all that long ago, but just incredible individuals. On the topic of Bill, he's the one that had kicked off at least maybe the recent news cycle of his argument for privatization of Fannie and Freddie. Now, he's got a vested interest in that happening because he's owned that stock for a decade or more. But sharp guy for sure. I guess I can give him any money I might make in the future and hope he doesn't lose it all in some defunct real estate community. But in that article or that post that he put out that you were referencing, it's a fascinating concept of investing in massive kind of like mini cities. I don't remember if you recall the exact terminology that he used for them, but a pretty cool concept. I mean, it's the kind of thing that could be fun to be invested in for sure.
You bet. What a world. Well, Jeff, I don't think the breaking news is going to stop. As I've heard someone say that we're in a breaking news environment right now, and we certainly are. Never a dull moment. We will be back next week to talk about more what's happening there, and look forward to the next conversation.
Boy, absolutely. It's fun as always. These conversations force us to be paying attention to what's happening, and hopefully have at least a semi-enlightened opinion about it. But appreciate it, Mark. It's fun as always.